Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Welcome. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
I'm the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for coming back. If it's your first time ever catching us this week, Darrin does a lot of really amazing things with people that owe the IRS money, just in case you've never caught the show and it's your first time.
Yeah, those are my people, for sure. People, I like to say that I focus, because I'm not allowed to say specialize. I focus on helping people who have IRS, quite frankly, disasters. That's what I do. I help people who think that they have a huge problem, and hopefully, quite often, we turn it into something that's really manageable and not that bad.
And he makes these things look easy. We share every week the train wreck of the week, which we'll have another one for you today. And all the shows are available on a podcast.
They absolutely are. They're available on iTunes as well as Android as well. And it's under it's kind of confusing, but the podcast is called the IRS Problem Solver. But if you just search for my name, Darrin Mish, in the search bar, you'll definitely find it. There's loads and loads of podcast episodes if you have tax problems and you want to learn more about how I can help you, or how perhaps you might even be able to help yourself. Yeah,
because there's a lot of great tips that we share every single week on the show, and many things that I've learned over the years just by doing the show with you that I didn't know before. So.
Absolutely. Every week I talk to people that I'm not a really great fit to help them solve their problem, because, their problem isn't big enough and the fee would be disproportionate to, the size of their problem, that kind of thing. But I try to take time out and help those folks and tell them what they need to do, because that's how I would want somebody to treat me.
And plus, it's really nice just to be able to push that podcast to them. Like if you're short on time, they could listen to you explain that in detail.
Yeah, it's a lot better because, we devote this time every week to go ahead and talk about these things, and it's a lot more leverageable. It's a lot more, what's the word I'm thinking of, efficient for me to do it 1 hour a week instead of trying to do it to, 300 people who call during a week and want to answer that, want to ask their questions.
Definitely good use of time. So if you do have a question, though, or a problem, and you think it's something that you definitely need to talk to Darrin about, you can reach him at 888-GET-MISH.
That's 888-GET-MISH, 888-438-6474. Please don't call 1-800-GET-MISH. That person's had that phone number for a very long time, over 20 years, and it has a tendency to really annoy them. So 888.
You should make friends with them and make sure that they tell the callers that it's 888.
I've been trying to buy that number for years and can't manage to get it. There's also our website. You can visit it at getirshelp.com.
Okay. GetIRShelp.com.
Also, for years, I've been trying to buy Mish.com. I mean, how
you can get Mish?
How cool is that?
What about Darrin Mish?
Four letters long. But there's evidently a economist, kind of guy with the last name Mish that we're not related. I wish we were. And
you should invite him on the show. It'd be fun.
He owns it, and he's not parting with it. So our website is getirshelp.com.
Which is relevant for what you do, so it works.
Yeah, it pretty much says what we do. We help people get help with the IRS.
So our topic for today's show
is tips for those who missed the tax deadline. So if you've been living in a cave or under a rock, or just maybe at a cruise at sea for weeks, like some relatives of mine are. They're out in the middle of the Atlantic bobbing around on their way from Tampa, Florida to Barcelona, Spain.
I saw that cruise and wanted to go on it. It's a long one, right, where it ends up in Europe?
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks. And, they went on a really nice Royal Caribbean ship, and I'm sure they're having fun, and I'm sure they're actually not listening. But
Pat's like, dang, I wish I was on that ship.
If you missed it, the tax filing deadline was April 18th this year.
A couple extra days squeezed in there.
And the reason was that
some weird Boston holiday, right? Or patriotic holiday or something. We talked about it.
I said it was Patriots Day from Boston a couple episodes ago. It turns out it was Emancipation Day, rather.
I was going to say, is that a new word? I haven't heard that one.
Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C. on Friday. And when it falls on a holiday, then it has to get shifted to the next Monday. So the people up north actually had until April the 19th to file, which is also bizarre.
Yeah, that is very bizarre. How did they get away with that one?
Shouldn't there just be one filing deadline?
Yeah, that's what I would think.
But
national.
I think it shows you that the people up in New England have a lot of political power, a lot of pull.
Right.
So the filing deadline was April 18th for 2016. And if you didn't file your tax return or at least an extension, then you probably should have, because the problem is that penalties and interest are accruing now and probably faster than you think.
And so what's a good tip that we could give our person listening if they just, for some reason, maybe they were on that cruise or they missed that deadline?
So it's important to note that there's two penalties that are accruing right now if you just didn't file an extension and you owe tax, okay? One is the filing of the late return, and that's one set of penalties. And the other one is late payment of the tax, because we don't talk about this a lot, but people think that filing an extension gets you more time to pay your taxes. Well, it really doesn't.
I swear I thought that for the longest time before doing this show. I honestly thought if you filed an extension, it was an extension for everything.
Yeah, you actually have to pay your taxes by the deadline, the filing deadline, or you at least have to get within 90% accuracy to avoid paying a penalty. So these two penalties, the failure to file, or late filing rather, and failure to pay, can actually max out at up to 50% of the tax due. It takes a while before that happens, but it's like 0.5% per month, or any fraction of a month.
Do you think because of the penalty and interest, that's why some of your tax cases are so big? I mean, these people come in with crazy numbers.
Oh, without question. That's why they're so big. And there are times, and I don't really have time to explain what I'm going to say here, but there are times when you want the balance to be larger rather than smaller. And so
larger, do tell, because that does not make sense to me.
All right, larger tax liabilities are actually easier. This is all like stereotypical, kind of commentary that I'm giving you, but larger tax balances are easier to compromise through the use of an offer and compromise than smaller balances. And let me tell you why. The IRS has 10 years from the date of the assessment of the tax to collect the tax. That's the statute of limitations. It's 10 years. So imagine that you're somebody who owes, $25,000, and you come in and there's still 10 years left on the statute, and you say, Darrin, I want to go ahead and compromise this tax debt. Well, the equation for an offer and compromise is monthly disposable income times 12 plus assets equals the amount of the offer. So let me give you a short example. If your monthly disposable income was $100, 100 times 12 is $1,200. Let's assume you have no assets. Then, $1,200 on a $25,000 debt is a pretty good deal. I mean, I'd take that deal every day and twice on Sunday. The problem is, if that monthly disposable income figure is sufficient to full pay within the life of the statute of limitations, then the IRS is not going to give you the deal. They just want you to make those payments. So they just want you to go ahead and pay that $100 over the 10 years until the $25,000 is paid. Okay? So what that means is that if they owe a larger amount of money, so let's go ahead and 10x this thing.
Not feasible, right?
Yeah, let's 10x this thing. You owe $250,000 now, and you have the same 10 years. Is it easier or harder to convince the IRS that you can never afford to pay $250,000? It's
going to be a lot easier because it's a bigger number.
It's a lot easier. So I got an offer through in the past month or two on a young couple that owed $25,000. And when I got the acceptance letter, I did like a little happy dance in the receptionist area, and I was really, really, happy about it because it was hard. I had to prove that that couple couldn't pay $25,000 over 10 years. Now,
which, let's face it, almost everybody could come up with $25,000
over
10 years. I mean, you think about your kids, like if you had to come up with if you had to buy something that would keep your child alive, you could come up with that $25,000 real freaking quick.
Exactly. So that's the whole point. So your initial question was, hey, do I think that some of my cases, the balances get so big because of penalties and interest? Answer is, yeah, all of them. I mean, all of them are so big because of penalties and interest. Because if you think about who my typical taxpayer is or my typical client is, they're a non-filer, right? So they don't file for long periods of time. And then we get those filings caught up. And then we have a big, ginormous number. And then we figure out what the solution is. The solution to do an offer and compromise, which, again, is where you make a deal to settle for less. Or is it to wait a few years and do a bankruptcy? Is it to do an installment agreement? Is it to sell your house or get a home equity line in your house and just full pay it? All of these solutions are different depending upon the person's unique facts and circumstances.
And they take roughly how long to complete? Most of them are.
When you're talking about an offer and compromise, they have up to 2 years to accept or reject the offer. Did you know this? That if they go 2 years in a day, then the offer is deemed accepted. And there's no more discussion. Now, I've never seen one like that, but it can happen.
Wow, that would be sweet if you got that for the first time. Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We have to take a quick break. If you have a question, feel free to call Darrin's office, 888-GET-MISH.
888-GET-MISH.
And he's happy to discuss a lot of these with you in detail. We know most of you guys don't want to call the studio to talk about your tax problem, and that's okay, but we'll be here, 888-GET-MISH. IRS Solution Attorney will be back in just a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Today we're talking about tips for those who missed the tax deadline. If you've been living under a rock or out on a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean for weeks, the filing deadline was April 18th, and we were talking about just the different penalties and whatnot that can accrue and what you should do if you actually missed the deadline. What a lot of people do is they just kind of freak out, quite honestly. They do. They just kind of stress out. They have a lot of anxiety. They're worried they're going to go to prison and all kinds of, sort of crazy ideas.
I was going to ask you, when we were talking in the last segment, because we talked about this on the show in the past, that many times people actually, they're so nervous. Like you talked about the guy that thought the IRS was outside and all this different stuff. How once they hire you, do you find that they're a lot more relieved? That they kind of can relax a little bit, or are they still very uptight and stressed out until you get all the way through the end?
There tends to be two vastly different sides of that equation. So on the one hand, no, they're still just as freaked out, and they're just going to be freaked out the whole time, and there's just nothing you can do about it, and they're just going to be high strung and upset and worried. And the other guy is like, cool, Darrin's on it. See ya. And then they don't cooperate. They don't communicate.
Oh,
they just,
no.
They're like, hey, I wrote you a check and the problem's over, right? Okay, see ya. And they just kind of check out. And the people that quite honestly get the best, sort of solutions or results are people who are in the middle of those two, vastly different scenarios.
So how involved do they have to be? I mean, you're saying cooperate. What kind of things do they need to do if you're in the middle of a tax mess with them?
Well, just about every case we need certain documentation, right? I mean, it always cracks me up. Bank statements are one of those things that in my business. It's just like a cornerstone, fundamental thing that you gotta have.
So they ask for your current bank statements.
So we're going to ask the client because the IRS is going to ask us for bank statements going back usually 3 to 6 months. And
you have their power of attorney. Can't you just get it from the bank?
No, because I don't have a general power of attorney. I just have a power of attorney with regard to IRS matters.
Okay.
And frankly, I don't want the general power of attorney. I don't want I don't want to do that because. Listen, I mean, you don't deal on the lending side so much anymore of real estate, but how hard is it to get a bank statement? Like honestly, seriously.
Well, we've had to modify our authorization forms over the years because of stuff like that. People just, sometimes they flake out, and then, we still have to do everything we can to get it done on time.
So your answer is we just get it for them.
It's still hard because everything's so privacy-centric right now that
So
it's hard.
That was a rhetorical question, really. So most of my clients use a large banking institution that has online bank statements.
Right.
Okay. Most of the people aren't even getting the bank statements in the mail. I don't think I get bank statements in the mail.
No, I don't either. And the problem is that they don't want to do it. They'll do a verification of account, but that's it.
Yeah, I had a opportunity to ask somebody this question earlier this week, and I said it was a non-filing situation. So we were going to get the business bank statements so that we could help put together a business tax return. Okay, and so I told the lady that I needed the bank statements going back several years, say go back 5 years, and she's like, well, gee, I don't know, I don't know if my bank will go back that far. I said, well, who do you bank with? She says Wells Fargo. I happen to be able to check. And Wells Fargo goes back to 2009. So the point of my explanation here is that a lot of the behaviors that got people into tax problems to begin with are behaviors that they continue to exhibit when we're trying to solve the problem. It's procrastination, failure to sort of prioritize what's important, it's really a procrastination situation where they just want to put it off because, and I don't think they're bad people at all. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to be negative about them at all. It's just a situation where you got to solve a problem. You have to have a plan. You have to have a plan, and then you got to work the plan. So one of the biggest challenges in our kind of business is that people just don't adequately cooperate. And I don't ask them to do anything crazy.
So when someone comes in for the initial meeting, do you usually give them kind of a general checklist of what they need, what you need to get started on it? Like you use that example of going back, what'd you say, 5 years for the bank statements?
Right. So that's not typical either, by the way. Usually we need 3 months worth of bank statements at some point during the representation. So 3 months is really not a big hurdle. Go log on.
Yeah,
click the link,
right,
print it out, either mail those or scan those or fax those over to us, and we're done. But what we do is we actually have some pretty neat software that we did not develop. It's off-the-shelf software for people who do what I do. And we are able to send them an email that has a link inside of it. And when they click the link, it takes them to a client questionnaire, and they're like inside of their file in our software. So it's all web-based, and they're going to answer some simple questions about their finances. It might take a half an hour. And by the way, every single person is going to do it wrong. And that's okay. Because we know we've been doing this for years. We know what looks wrong and what looks right. And so, but there are just certain financial questions that only the taxpayer can answer. There's no way for me to find out what your car payment is.
Right.
There's no way for me to know how much your house payment is. There's no way for me to know how much money you have in a bank account. Those types of really personal questions where, I need some help. Now, there are people who just can't do it. I mean, for whatever reason, either their attention span is too short or their anxiety is too high. They just can't do it. So
just tell them to order a credit report, give it to you, and you can pull the information off there.
There's not necessarily everything on the credit report that we would need, but in those limited situations, what we do is we basically assign a staff member, and they just talk to them.
They hold their hand and walk them through the process.
Literally, staff members in their file on the software, and they just ask the questions and they type the answers in. We'd rather not do that because it's not really efficient. It's not really, cost effective.
Good use of time.
But we do that for certain people. And it has a tendency to be the older folks or the people who just have really super high anxiety. There's a lot of people who have some, minor mental health problems or minor emotional problems, and that contributes to the fact that they end up with a tax problem. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
They have trouble coping with everything. So it's no big surprise that they have trouble coping with their taxes. Yeah, a big thing. When I used to do criminal defense work, we used to see the mentally ill in the courtrooms for crimes all the time. And it wasn't really because their crimes were all that bad. We would see shoplifting. Same guy, shoplifting 18 times. And it wasn't even that he didn't have any money. It was just he didn't have any control over his impulses. A lot of times they were very, very low IQ. And so they would just end up in the criminal justice system time and time again.
It's fun for them, or it's an urge, or
it's just something that they need treatment for, and there's no social programs available to get that treatment until you get into the system. And then, a petty theft can be a felony after your third conviction. So you could actually go to prison for stealing a candy bar, at Publix. It can happen. It's not real common. Typically, most court systems, especially in the more metro areas of this state, will go ahead and try to treat that person's underlying, whatever that is, emotional or mental problem, and not just throw them in prison because it's expensive to house somebody in a prison. And so, to bring it back to the tax thing, so there's just people who have some emotional problems or mental problems, and they just have a little bit harder time dealing with the tax, obligations. But usually we get them cleaned up and kind of set them off in the right direction, and it all goes well from there.
No, it got us a little bit off topic, but sometimes I just have these curious questions that pop up.
Yeah, for sure. So we were talking about, what do you do if you haven't filed on time? You missed the deadline. What do you do? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and file as soon as you can, because those penalties are racking up at 0.5% a month times 2. And then
on top of last month's
interest and penalties compounded daily. And any fraction of a month is another month. So
yeah, we talked about that last week. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. So if you didn't file on April 18th, by the time you get to May, so let's say 19th, that's 2 months. Even if you file on May 19th, it's 2 months. So you want to go ahead and file as fast as you can. Now, there's actually something called IRS Free File, and if you made $62,000 or less, you can use that situation, and those are online. They're fillable forms that you can e-file, and there's no charge to use the program. And I think that's really what the IRS is going to. They're trying to move farther and farther towards like almost like I think
a self-file society.
What they want is an automatic filed society, you know, and they keep trying to push initiatives to where there's more and more information returns with like 1099s. So they're trying to track every dollar through the economy so that they could ultimately file for you, because it would be a lot. I mean, everybody would pay more tax. Not
you think
everybody,
they'll
but a lot
actually
of people.
file for you? You think we're moving to that?
Yeah, that's what they're trying to get to, is a situation where the IRS files for you and can file for you, and then they go ahead and just start to collect the money from there. We're a ways off from that, because when they tried the experiment with 1099s between corporations, it was a disaster, because they didn't realize that was going to generate billions, if not trillions, of information returns, and literally their computers couldn't handle it. But they did. I mean, we did get down that road, and they did try to do that. But because 1099s are not required for corporations that are doing business with each other, right? So
right. It's just if you want the write-off, you should issue the 1099.
Well, there's no, as far as I know, there's no requirement to issue the 1099. It's probably just, you know, good, safe practice at this point. But prior to a few years ago, you never saw a 1099 issued to a corporation, like ever. Now,
yeah, because I noticed that come up in my own situation for the last several years. They're just saying, hey, if it's over whatever that amount is, you should have them sign a W-9 or issue a 1099.
The other thing that they have been doing, which is probably net a good thing, is they're issuing 1099s for credit card transactions. So, again, prior to maybe 5 years ago or so, they didn't issue 1099s for credit card processing accounts, and now they are.
Yes.
And so that's really, you know, probably a good thing, net for people who have to file returns.
See, for somebody like me, I never took credit cards until recently, because that's not our business. We don't do that.
Yeah, you take credit cards now?
Well, for the radio stuff.
Oh, okay.
And
for radio
occasional
stuff,
rental payments.
Maybe a credit report or something like that.
Rental application fees. So.
Yeah.
Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We have to take a quick break. We will be back, and we'll continue on with tips for those that actually missed the tax deadline. Back in a moment.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin T. Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin T. Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show with Mr.
Darrin T. Mish, the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell, keeping it fun.
Today we're trying to talk about tips for those who missed, the filing tax deadline. And,
but see, I think this is so much like last week. So my random questions that come in my head
great.
That I usually don't ask. We're getting a little bit off topic.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of fun to just go ahead and talk about things that have happened, situations, and just to answer questions, then stick to some boring stale sort of
attorney
sort of outline.
If you have a question for Darrin, you're welcome to call his office. You can reach him directly at 888-GET-MISH.
888-GET-MISH, 888-438-6474, 888-438-6474.
And again, don't forget 888 first.
Mish. It also works with 866 and 855, I think, but 888 is always safe.
Oh, my gosh. Don't add all that into the mix. Darrin, what are you doing?
So, if you didn't file your taxes because you missed the filing deadline, or you just were incapacitated, or you just didn't think about it, you just blew it, then, interest and penalties are continuing to accrue right now, and you want to go ahead and get those things filed as soon as you can to try to eliminate or reduce the penalties wherever you can. We talked about e-filing with IRS Free File, and that is available up until on the IRS's website at irs.gov. That's irs.gov until October the 17th, which is the extension filing deadline this year. E-filing seems a little bit freaky, to somebody that's old school and has been filing paper returns for a lot of years, but we do everything else virtually right now on the internet. I think I'm at the point where I probably pay more bills online than I do paper checks.
Oh, for sure. I do too.
I think I write about 3 or 4 paper checks a month anymore.
I don't think the e-stuff freaks people out, but when we were talking about the IRS free file, that kind of freaked me out a little bit. Like, I can't even imagine the IRS actually doing my own returns. Like, what?
Yeah, that's kind of their utopia. That's their nirvana. They're trying to get to the point where they can file for taxpayers. And I think for wage earners, people who get W-2s and have withholdings on a regular basis, I don't think that's that far off, especially if you've already kind of filed a document that said my kids are this age and, I have a mortgage interest and this is the rate and all that kind of thing. If they don't get to a point where they can file for you, they're going to get to a point where they need like five numbers.
So talking about kids and a question, at what point, like when you're taking your children as deductions, are they not a deduction anymore? Because many times kids live at home, they go to college. Are they still a deduction at that point?
You're supposed to run these questions by me before you put me on the spot.
I know, but I just like to spring them on you.
I think the answer is, I think it's up to 26 now, and I think that has to do with the ACA.
Because I thought it was extended too.
Affordable Care Act. I can tell you that.
But only like if they're not claiming themselves, right?
Yeah. If they claim themselves, then you can't claim as a deduction. But I can tell you that I was actually a dependent of my parents until I was about 26 because I went to college and then I went to law school, and I was going to
say, you're an attorney, so I'm sure you were dependent for a while because you have the student loans that follow that.
Yeah, student loans. Boy, don't even get me started. But, they're just really important to pay because if you don't pay them, then guess who gets to collect the money, ultimately?
Wouldn't that be a fun conversation for the show?
The IRS ultimately collects the money for defaulted federally guaranteed student loans, too. So the IRS has become like the de facto default federal collection agency. They collect money for
government, Congress,
defaulted child support, all kinds of things that you wouldn't think about. And it's kind of interesting. We get a lot of calls from all around the country and say, hey, they kept my refund for, not paying child support or because I defaulted on a student loan or something, and they want me to help them. Well, it's not really a tax problem.
Right.
It's not tax debt. It's just something that the IRS
we
has been
should do a
tasked
show
with collecting.
sometimes, like on those minor questions that you're really just not the best suited, you know what I mean, to answer in your everyday practice. We should do a show that addresses just those things.
Yeah, I know a guy who specializes in student loan law. And student loans, there's really not very many options besides paying. They're generally not dischargeable in bankruptcy. There's some exceptions to that. And he'd be a fun guest to have on the show and talk about.
They do wipe out on death, though, don't they? I'm pretty sure they do.
Well, I don't know.
I thought they did. Not sure.
I just know that I had a lot of student loans, and I really sacrificed and scrimped and saved to make sure that they got paid off. They're not quite paid off, honestly. There's a little bit left, but it's at such an attractive interest rate that there's really no point in paying.
You don't want to just choke a check.
But there was
18%.
There were some times when my privately guaranteed student loans were 12, 14%.
Oh, yeah. The real cost of money at one point.
And we're talking 6 figures, and so it was stout. And what a lot of people don't do, even with tax debt, when they find themselves in a debt hole, is they don't. It just is so overwhelming. It leads me to this question: how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. So if the debt is the elephant, you can't fit the whole elephant. You can't fit the whole elephant in your mouth, right?
That'd be fun to watch. Someone try.
Your head would explode, or your mouth, or something would explode. So you got to figure out some kind of plan, and that's what I did with my student loan debt. Even was I put it all in a spreadsheet or something like a spreadsheet, and it's like, this is who I owed, and this is how much the interest rate is, and this is what the balance is. And you just have to devise a plan. I mean, I'm sure Dave Ramsey talks about this stuff all the time. You just have to devise some sort of plan.
Eat some rice and beans and stop going on vacation. That's what he tell you.
Yeah, and if it actually becomes, like when you're just mired in debt and you're just paying minimums, it just seems like a drag to write that check.
It's never going to go away.
Yeah, it's never going to go away, and it just feels like a drag. But
it's so liberating when you don't have the debt. Like, you just feel so free.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that when I have my debt, like, listed in a spreadsheet or something similar on a piece of paper right in front of me, and I write that check and I can see it diminishing, I can see it disappearing, I can see that I'm no longer paying those high interest rate, obligations in favor of the ones with lower interest rates, I can tell you, I actually get fired up about writing
It makes
those
you want to
checks.
write a bigger check, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And then what happens is you start to gain some velocity toward the end, and you're like, let's eat the rice and beans.
That's what Dave Ramsey calls the snowball.
Yeah. Okay. So we can have a
debt snowball.
we could have like one last rice and beans party, and then maybe next month we can go back to caviar and champagne dreams.
It was funny because I was in his office and he makes a joke. He's like, because he said that people have approached him about literally doing a rice and beans cookbook. And he's like, no, it's not literal, people. It's just, just you're not going out for lobster and steak.
I can tell you, for me, over the years, it was literal at some points in time. When you just have business downturns, or you're between jobs or whatnot, you just have to do what you have to do. And it's kind of the same with tax debt. You have to prioritize. You have to think about
how are you going to get it done
and what's important. And some of that
when you say the biggest hurdle is people just don't know what to expect because they don't know the rules and the laws and what they can and can't do.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say one of the biggest steps could be just go talk to a professional such as myself, because one of the things that creates so much angst and confusion and anxiety, frankly, is you don't know what you don't know. So how are you supposed to make an informed, intelligent decision based on mathematics and facts?
Well, I can tell you I don't get very anxious over almost anything. I'm pretty even keel. But the things that make me anxious would be something big like that I don't know. Like the fear of the unknown, that would make me anxious.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, frankly, why I do so many videos and why we do the podcast and why we talk about this stuff, is because there's just really a lack of information about the programs and the options that are available for people who owe lots of tax debt. And we just want to make sure that they get that. Because one of the things that really pains me, I mean, it hurts me in my heart, is to see someone come in my office and they say, I've owed tax debt for 5 years and my life has just been essentially ruined because I can't function because I'm so freaked out about it. I think I'm going to go to prison and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because life is so short. Like he could die he or she could die next year or next week. And why would you spend so many hours and days and months into years worrying about that?
Yeah, and it impacts your family relationships. Let's face it. It impacts your marriage, your relationship at home with the kids.
Do you see that sometimes that's the breaking point for people? Like when the spouse is ready to leave, it's when they finally decide to, I hate to say get help and show up like AA, but come see you.
Yeah, unfortunately I have. I've seen that a lot. And I've actually had, a number of people who were, had large tax problems and ultimately get divorced while I was representing them. Had nothing to do with me. But
it was already on the brink.
It was already there, And I think that one of the biggest stressors in relationships, well, first would probably be lack of good communication, but the second one would be money.
It is,
right?
Yeah, because it's way up there.
The rich people get divorced too, but if you have money stressors, that makes everything in your life, more complicated.
It takes a big part of that equation out.
It's kind of like having a back problem. If you have a back problem, everything you do in life physically hurts. So it's going to make everything harder. And so I think if you're having financial problems when you're married, you owe taxes, or what happens a lot is you have one spouse, typically the wife. I'm going to go ahead and give females some kudos here. Typically the wife.
I'll be the good wife.
Typically the good wife is, working a wager in her job, having taxes withheld, doing what she needs to do, because that's kind of how many females are wired, right?
I'm a teacher.
I just want to do the straightforward kind of, correct thing. And then there's the husband. He's the wild-eyed entrepreneur. He's going to conquer the world, and he's going to, make $1 million. And, taxes and filing paperwork and keeping track of records and accounting and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Just not super high on the priority list, right? Because I'm trying to conquer the world. I'm trying to kill elephants and stuff. And one sort of picture that always goes through my mind is I think about caveman days a lot. I don't really know why. But so you're the husband and wife, or the male and the female, they're in the cave, right? And the woman's in the back of the cave. She's got a fire going. She's cooking what the man brought back and stuff. And but she wants nothing to do with that bear that's out at the mouth of the cave. And the knucklehead male, he runs out there because he's strong and brave and all that stuff. And he goes out there to fight the bear and gets killed. So I think you could say that might even sound a little bit chauvinistic, but that is kind of how I see.
It makes sense in the scenario you just explained.
Yeah, it's kind of how I see most women and most men react to having a tax problem. Now, have I seen women who are like, "Hey, I'm going to conquer the world, and I don't have time for this." Yeah, for sure. And I've seen men on the other.
Since you explained the whole story, and it was just me and my husband only totally reversed.
Yeah. I mean, it's just stereotypically more true the other way, at least in my experience. But there's usually one spouse who's like, records? What do we need records for, man? I'm trying to do things here, some important things. And then the other one is usually like, okay, let's do things, the right conventional way and make sure that we don't have problems and things like that.
So we've had a little fun here today, and we've got a little bit off track, but we'll get back on track here. And if you have questions for Darrin, maybe something like what we explained sounds like your situation, and you think it's time to call Darrin, you can be the wife or the husband. That's okay. His number is 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH, which the numbers are...
You could even be single. It's 888-GET-MISH, 888-438-6474, 888-438-6474.
There's businesses that collapse and people that are on the brink of, I owe this money, now I don't have it.
Yeah, one of the things about tax problems is there's tax problems in a good economy, there's tax problems in a bad economy. There's people today deciding they're not going to pay their taxes because they're going to use that money for something else, and that's okay.
So
but
if you just bought that big screen TV a year from now, don't forget 888-GET-MISH. We got to take a break. We'll be back in a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Miss Katrina Madewell.
Today we're talking about tips for those of you who missed your tax filing deadline. That was on April 18th. So if you didn't file a tax return and you did not file an extension on time, then there are penalties and interest accruing right now. And talking about things that you can do to try to minimize those penalties and interest and try to get yourself right.
We've had a lot of fun and kind of like went a little off track. So why don't you give us the short and skinny?
Okay, so the short and skinny is, penalties are accruing day one after you didn't file your taxes on time or pay them by April 18th, and they can max out at up to 50% of tax. And then there's interest compounding daily. So you're going to want to go ahead and file your tax return as soon as you possibly can. If your tax return is kind of easy and, you make $62,000 or less, you can use what's called IRS Free File. It's on the IRS website, or you can just go ahead and Google that, IRS Free File. And
what are your thoughts on that for real, though? We talked about it, but...
if you have the type of return that there's wages in, and if it's basically a 1040 easy kind of situation, I think it's great, honestly, because you don't need a professional to prepare that return. We do prepare a fair number of 1040 easies, but typically if they're non-filers, so there's been a number of years stretched together, and so that makes it a little bit more complicated. But if you're just a guy who's working a job and having the right amount of tax taken out and you expect a refund, then the IRS Free File program is fine. There's not a problem with that at all. So if you are in a situation where you can file your return, but you're going to owe, and you can't afford to pay it all,
just say, here you go, here's the money.
Then you're going to want to go ahead and pay as much as you can, because as soon as you pay it, then obviously interest and penalties are not accruing on that, right?
It's kind of like this thing where it goes up, you make a payment, boom, it goes down. It's like this little loopy wave.
Maybe a little bit. It is not as bad as a credit card typically, unless you have some kind of fairly low interest credit card. But remember that the penalties on an IRS tax debt, what happens is they're real bad real quick at the very toward the very beginning, and then they max out at about 50%. I mean, 50% is like sick.
Yep, yours.
That's
a lot.
It's sick. So you want to go ahead,
especially on some of these numbers.
Yeah, so you want to go ahead and try and avoid that if you can. There's something on the IRS's website called IRS Direct Pay, and you can find that at irs.gov/payments, which is so logical it's not hard to remember. And you can actually pay right out of your checking account right to the IRS. I've used it myself for personal tax debt that I've owed, and it works really well. And I really like it because you can send them a check, of course, but it's going to take, several days to get there and get posted and all that kind of thing. And IRS Direct Pay seems to be rather instantaneous, rather efficient, and I like it because if you're paying penalties on every day, I want it there faster, not slower.
Right. And every week we have some questions that you normally get on your social feeds. You can catch up with Darrin at Darrin_Mish, and he's also on Facebook.
I'm on Facebook as well, and pretty much every social media platform where you can find us. You can find us on our website at getirshelp.com as well.
So what questions do we have this week? You got the list, let me.
Well, let me just go back and say, if you still owe more than you can afford to pay, using IRS Direct Pay, then you can call the IRS and get onto an installment agreement. If you owe under $50,000, you can usually spread that out over 72 months, and it can be, not that bad. If you owed $10,000 over 72 months, I mean, the payments aren't really all that crazy, but just know that penalty is going to accrue, and you're going to end up paying more than you would if you could afford to borrow that from some cheaper source. So if you have the ability to borrow that, put that on a credit card typically, or borrow it from friends or family, or savings even.
That's kind of scary. That's better, really.
Then you want to do that. So, yeah, because the IRS is going to be the most expensive money that you borrow, ever.
Even at 3%, haha.
Yeah, it's 3% time,
Yeah, it's not really 3% anyway.
on the 50% and the compounded daily and all that kind of stuff. So,
who had what question this week? Do we have any? Did you get any questions?
Yeah, funny.
Usually I have that.
Funny question. Funny question from Cheryl. It says, "My computer crashed that has had all of my TurboTax forms on it. Do you have any ideas on how to get them back?"
Ouch! I can comment on that one. I had a QuickBooks crash. Remember, I told you that a while back, and I could not recoup any of that data. It was like after an update, I backed it up. It still would not restore. Like I'm still like anti QuickBooks because of it.
Yeah, my advice. I don't have any advice for how to get that data back, but my advice would be, with as cheap as like cloud storage is nowadays with, Box.com and Dropbox.com and even Google, what do they call it?
Drive.
Google Drive. There's so many of these options that are free. There's really almost no excuse not to just have an online backup of virtually everything. But I'm sorry I can't help you, Cheryl.
Well, in my case, it was I did the backup and it wouldn't restore.
Yeah, you want to have more than one backup too.
Yeah.
So.
And in this day and age, I think, more and more platforms and people come out and it's easier to connect with people. So, had it had been that long ago, I probably could have posted it on one of those freelance sites for people that specialize in that.
Yeah.
And getting that data back.
Yeah. You might be able to, Cheryl, you might be able to contact the IRS and get your IRS transcripts. They're called your wage and income transcripts, and they might be able to give you those, the W-2s, 1099s, 1098s, that kind of thing.
Be a great place to start.
Yeah, it'd be a good place to start, for sure.
Well, it's about that time.
The IRS Train Wreck of the Week is our segment where we talk about somebody who came into the office and they were a total and complete train wreck, and no surprise they're here, where they always leave happy. So today's...
That's right, or they don't make the list, the cut list of the Train Wreck of the Week.
Yeah, the cases where they don't leave happy, they don't make the cut for the IRS Train Wreck of the Week. This one is a little bit interesting. It's a lot different than anyone that I've ever shared before, and here's how it goes. I had a gentleman come in who was actually a lawyer, and he had filed a bankruptcy himself. He wasn't a bankruptcy lawyer, and he filed it. That's called pro se when you're representing yourself. And he had filed a bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy had been going on for quite some time, months and months and months, and the IRS was still levying him. And a levy is a seizure, right? So, I mean, they were taking his wages, they were levying his bank accounts. They weren't taking all that stuff because he didn't have that kind of stuff. But they were levying his source of income, and they were slowly just, choking off the air. They were just, crushing his windpipe, so to speak. And he came in to the office. I'd known him for quite some time.
Is that the worst? Like when you have an attorney come in to you, that they're probably like they.
Well, attorneys fall into two camps. Okay, as clients, they're either perfect. They know that I know what I'm doing, so they should just let me do it, or they want to micromanage every bit of the experience, and that doesn't usually work out as well because they don't know what they're doing. And so I don't go to the doctor and say, "But doc, really, we should adjust this medication because I really know better." It's not like that. And I love representing lawyers for the most part because most of them just kind of know, hey, you know what you're doing. Just help me out. Explain it to me, which I do pretty well. And they just let me do my thing. But this gentleman actually he was in a bankruptcy. It was still pending when he came to talk to me, and he wanted me to just get the levies off because he was just, choking to death. And I explained to him, there's this thing called an automatic stay that happens when you file a bankruptcy. And the automatic stay is what protects you from creditors. It protects you from those creditors taking adverse actions like, seizing your house and that kind of stuff. So what had happened is he had not properly noticed the IRS that he was actually in bankruptcy. Literally one phone call, called the IRS, hey, automatic stay's in place. You guys are in violation of the automatic stay. And it turns out they released the levy.
Like a hot potato,
day,
right?
And he's going to get about $17,000 in refunds of the levied money for while he was in bankruptcy.
And they finally stopped choking his ear off.
Yeah, so I consider that a win. I mean, it's not a solution to his entire problem yet, and hopefully he gets to be a train wreck in the future. But it was a train wreck, or was a great solution for him in that particular scenario.
I love that, though. It's different.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I'm your co-host, Katrina Nadewell.
And I'm Darrin T, Mish, the Solution Attorney.
And this week,
we're out.